David, fair.
Good evening.
Finally,
How are you?
I am doing very, very well. Good to see you. Thank you so much. That's such short notice and so on. Extended the invitation and you obliged me. So I am so happy that you were able to join in for the podcast interview today. Or for
No
the,
problem. I apologize. I have two big dogs who may interfere from time to time. I just want to apologize in advance for that.
And that's fine. But we're so happy to have you. And I see that. But let me begin officially before. Actually, I see that we went to the same school. We both went to University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, a little bit different periods, though.
Yes, yes.
Like 40 years apart, I think.
Oh, yes, definitely. And we both work. Well, I have worked in child, youth, and family services, and of course, I see that you have worked at the highest level in child, youth, and family services in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Yes.
So I have to ask you a question. Do you consider yourself a neoliberal, or do you just study neoliberalism?
I just study it. I study strategy. I wrote a book on neoliberalism, globalization, income inequality, poverty, and resistance. So it's more looking at strategy. And when people ask me about that, it gives me a great opportunity to talk about the dynamics of the global north and the global south, how income inequality and how poverty was created through social adjustment policies, and how those policies affect people of the global south and the diaspora. Yes, so it's just a strategy.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So
neoliberalism is not one of my favorite approaches to social issues, but
yeah, but that was part of my thesis at Penn, and but now I'm looking at power, position, and status, and how power uses strategies that poses problems for progress. That's what that. And I'm
all these minor issues you try to deal with. I don't understand.
Yes. Yes. But I'm so happy to have you, man. And I follow you, just so you know. I read your stuff. So I saw that you were interviewed by HBO yesterday. But let me begin officially. Welcome to the Neoliberal Round podcast, everyone. I am Ronaldo McKenzie, and today we have with us Mr. David Fair, who recently said on LinkedIn in a posting on LinkedIn, "I'm humbled to have been interviewed by a TV crew from HBO for the third series of Eyes on the Prize, the award-winning documentary series telling the stories of the civil rights movement in the U.S. The first two series were broadcasted in the 80s and covered up to 1985, and the new series will be broadcasted next year. And you said they will pick up from there. So now, but before I ask you about the new series, which you may have probably seen it already. I'm not sure, but they're working on it, I presume.
Yeah.
But before I ask you, let me say welcome to the show, and I would love to learn a little bit about you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you. What would you like to know?
Well, a little bit about your involvement in the film, because when at first I thought you were a producer, but then so I wasn't sure. So the first question I wanted to ask you is your involvement in the film, and how are you involved in the film? How are you involved?
Well, they're picking what HBO is doing with this new series is picking up where the previous series of Eyes on the Prize left off, which was 1985. And around that time, in the mid-1980s, was when the controversies around the AIDS epidemic were at their height. And in Philadelphia, unlike in other big cities like New York and San Francisco or even Miami, from the very beginning of the epidemic, the number of the people who were getting, what at that time we didn't know what to call it, but what we would now call HIV disease, they were mostly gay white men, but there was a large number, a much higher percentage of people of color, especially African
Yeah.
American people, who were being diagnosed with this disease in Philadelphia. And that led to a lot of controversy because in the mid 1980s, pretty much Reagan was president and he didn't give a damn about AIDS. And so the only work that was really being done to help people with AIDS and to prevent the spread of AIDS was being done in the gay white community, which had the resources to be able to do that.
Yes.
In Philadelphia, those of us who were involved, at that time I was working for a predominantly Black union called the Hospital Workers Union in Philadelphia. And so we were, our members of the union, a lot of whom were gay people, were having resistance. We're putting up resistance to caring for people with AIDS because they didn't know whether they could catch the disease by emptying their trash can or transporting them to an operating room or whatever. And so early on, where I was sitting, I was one of the few white leaders of that union. I learned, being a gay white man myself, I knew a lot about AIDS, but I learned that there was a whole dynamic around how AIDS was playing out in the African American and Latino communities that the gay white community was ignorant of. And not only ignorant of, but really resistant to understanding because of the fear that if we extended if we started talking about the AIDS crisis as affecting more than gay white men, then there would be fewer resources for gay people and more resources for the non-gay people who were not white. And even though most of the AIDS cases then and now in the Black community are still among gay people. Anyway, there were major controversies around that at the time. And I was one of the loudest voices complaining about the racism, basically, of the white gay community and how it addressed AIDS, which I felt was my job because I was white. I've never believed that it's up to Black people to solve the problem of racism. It's up to white people to solve the problem of racism. It's our problem. And that attracted a lot of attention. I got a lot of media attention. And somehow or another came to the attention of the HBO producers of this new series who wanted to talk to me about what it was like at that time and to help them connect to people of color, especially who were involved in that advocacy in the mid 1980s and late 1980s. So that's how it all developed that we got involved in this new video.
Right, and I think, but you also, I think, if I were to read you correctly, you said that the first installment of the series includes a segment on the struggle to combat AIDS and in the Black community and the resistance of the AIDS bureaucracy to the empowerment of people of color in the AIDS movement. And so that was quite interesting. So and of course, we're going to Eyes on the Prize for people who are not aware of Eyes on the Prize, the film or the series or the production. I wanted so I think you said the first two looks at the civil rights and segregation.
Yes.
And what's the time period for that one?
Right. And that went from the 19th century all the way up to 1985. Eyes on the Prize was mostly focused. There were two series. There were 2 seasons of Eyes on the Prize back in the late 80s. And the first series covered up till 1965 when the Civil Rights Act was passed by Congress. The second series went from 1965 to 1985 and talked a lot more about the Black Power movement, about the race riots that were happening, especially in the late 1960s. And they also talked about the fact that the civil rights movement became both less popular as well as less effective after the 1960s in the early 1970s,
mhm.
because the power structure basically learned that it could continue to hide, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, it
Right.
could continue to cloak racist activities and racist business practices and racist real estate practices and all that kind of stuff. They could put it in a different context, whereas in the previous iteration of this stuff in the 60s and 50s, it was easy to make the distinction between fairness and not unfairness. By the
Yes.
1970s, a conscious effort was being made by white politicians to
Yes.
feed into the grievance of white people who felt like black people were getting all of the benefits of
Mm,
government and didn't have to work for them. I mean, it was a classic racist kind of attitude. And that's what the second series of Eyes on the Prize focused on. I don't know exactly how they're handling the new series. All I know about is the segment that they were filming in Philadelphia
right.
over the
Okay.
last few days. But I imagine that it's not going to cover from 1985 to
Right.
George Floyd. It'll probably
Yes.
cover from 1985 to maybe the early 2000s, because they
Right.
only have 6 episodes, I think, and they have to get a lot in.
Yes. 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 Okay. And it's quite interesting that one of the things that you just said, which I wanted to piggyback on, go back to, was which is very important, the issue of racism of the white gay community as it relates to how that affected it HIV, AIDS, and care in towards African Americans. And when we think about discrimination and so on, and when we think about racism, usually people just think black and white. But here we are. You said white gay community. There was also within the gay community some level of racism, which
Oh,
may
absolutely.
have okay. And
I mean, I think I've always thought of the white gay community in Philadelphia as being like a small southern town. It was like
yes,
it's changed a lot in the
yes,
last 10 or 15 years, but back in the day, the only people of color you ever saw in gay community organizations or gay community events or the gay bars or other kinds of institutions in the gay community, the only people of color you saw were those who had white lovers.
yes,
And they were not necessarily, and not all of them obviously, but they were not necessarily seeing themselves as activists for the black community,
mm,
um, because of the sexual preferences that they had.
right,
They
right,
also tended to be people of some means. You
yes,
had people. The only, what struck me in the 80s, as a gay activist, was the only black people that the typical gay white man interacted with, besides those who happened to be well off and have well off black gay lovers, um, was young black gay people who were
yeah,
tussling, who were prostituting themselves, and
right,
were being patronized by white gay men.
yes,
They, in fact, we even had a situation that occurred in the 80s where we started a group called the Ehrman Center, which was a mental health center, created a group home for gay
yes,
kids. And
okay,
most of the gay kids that came into the group home were the ones who were homeless, and they were mostly African American. And
mm,
the moment that program of the Ehrman Center was created, there was major
yeah,
pressure from the white gay community to close the Ehrman Center, because it was like, why are we spending our money on these young black kids? There was just no recognition of how fundamentally racist the whole
right,
structure of the gay movement was in those days. I mean, that's
yes,
changed a lot in the last 10 or 15 years, but
yes,
and now the language at least has changed. I don't know that the racism has changed. We've gotten any
right,
better, but the language has changed certainly, and the political correctness is a lot stronger today than it ever was back then. But that was a major struggle for those of us who who, and you know, I was working at a predominantly Black union, so it mattered to me in a way it didn't necessarily matter to other white people, because I belonged to a basically Black community of healthcare workers. And that gave me a perspective. I think it was different than the typical white person. And they're the ones who taught me that they weren't going to fix this problem for me. I had to go into the white gay community as a white gay man and try to solve this problem.
Okay. And, you know, and you said that the resistance of the AIDS bureaucracy. You said that the struggle to combat AIDS in the Black community, and you talked about, and you mentioned this, the resistance of the AIDS bureaucracy to the empowerment of people of color. Now, so the question is, what do you mean by the resistance of the AIDS? What was the kind of the bureaucracy here?
Well, the bureaucracy initially was really, the bureaucracy was originally organizations created in the white gay community to combat AIDS, because there was no government response. So I'm not talking about government agencies initially. We're talking about the fact that the white gay community was getting decimated by AIDS and created its own organizations to help other white gay people who had AIDS. And there was no government money. I mean, today there's tens of millions of dollars being spent in Philadelphia to combat AIDS because government's involved. But before government was involved, all the money for services to combat AIDS had to come from gay people themselves. And that meant gay people who had the money to give, and that tended to be white gay people. And they created white gay organizations and created boards of directors of white gay organizations. And those white gay organizations had a predominantly white gay staff who understood the culture of the white gay community. The Black gay community wasn't part of that community. The white gay community in Philadelphia was based in the Central City area, Center City, Philadelphia. And the Black gay community was spread out throughout the Black neighborhoods throughout the rest of the city. And they kept to themselves in the same way that gay white men kept to themselves. So when those of us, such as myself and a number of Black activists, started organizing the Black gay community around AIDS, that was very threatening to what I call, in that post, I called them the AIDS bureaucracy, because they were the only game in town. They were the only people doing anything about AIDS. You know, eventually, when government started to spend money on AIDS, we were able to direct some money to the minority organizations that were dealing with AIDS. But for most of the beginning, the first 10 years of the AIDS epidemic, there was no African-American presence, there was no Latino presence, there was no money being spent in those communities. And as a result, as time went on, the white gay proportion of people who had AIDS started to reduce, and the Black and Latino proportion of people who had AIDS started to increase. And the Black and Latino community that was getting AIDS was not just gay people. It was a lot of people who were drug addicts. It was a lot of people who were closeted, married men in the Black community, especially, who were having sex on the side, gay sex on the side, but who were in denial about it and weren't telling their wives about it. And so suddenly we had all these women getting infected with AIDS because their husbands have been cheating on them with other men and spreading the disease to them. It was a much more complex epidemic in the Black and Latino community than it was. Plus the cultural resistance to homosexuality in the Black and Latino community was so much more severe. It was bad in the white community, but it was so much more severe in the Black and Latino community. And, you know, interestingly enough, during the 1980s, a guy named Wilson Goode was mayor of Philadelphia. He was the first Black mayor of Philadelphia. And my union was very close to him. We had helped elect him mayor of Philadelphia. So that gave, and I had a great relationship with him, and a personal relationship with him. And so early on, I started harassing him. And I ran what was called Gay and Lesbian Friends of Wilson Goode to help him get elected 2 times. And so I harassed him unmercifully about the fact that city government wasn't doing anything about AIDS. And his response to me was the city was going bankrupt, which it was at the time, and that they didn't have the money to spend anything on AIDS. They needed to get the money from the federal government. And Ronald Reagan was president, and he was not spending a lot of money on AIDS. Reagan was in denial about AIDS, and his big priority was the drug war and the mass incarceration of African American people. So he wasn't worried about AIDS decimating communities within the Black community. By 1987, things had gotten so bad in Philadelphia that he came to me and asked me if I would come into city government, leave the union, and come work for him in city government and create an AIDS office. And he gave me $9 million, what today would be $21 million. But at that time, it was $9 million. He gave me $9 million to create an AIDS program overnight. And in 8 months, we created a whole new bureaucracy, multiracial bureaucracy, with real money from the government that wasn't controlled by the white gay community. And we stood up a number of new organizations. Bibashi, which was a Black AIDS organization, Congreso de Latinos Unidos, Galay, other organizations, Unity Philadelphia. These were all organizations in communities of color who cared about AIDS. And we were able to invest money in those organizations to stand them up quickly. And most of those programs still exist today, whereas most of the white gay AIDS communities disappeared a long time ago.
Wow, this is quite, and I'm in Philadelphia. I live in Philadelphia. I've been here for 13 years. And I understand the stigma that's associated with HIV/AIDS, in not just in Philadelphia, but almost all African American or Black and brown cultures in Jamaica. I'm from Jamaica. It is severe. Not only are they dealing with the stigma associated with being a homosexual, but also the stigma associated with HIV/AIDS and I think that's still a stigma, and that's still an issue in the Caribbean. But I wanted to ask you, and so you are instrumental in the kind of the organization and the efforts that's being done in Philadelphia. It started from your vision and your work and your push in the 1987, because prior to that, government was not as involved. And so you helped to spearhead this.
Yes, I helped. I mean, I don't want to sound like I did it all. There were plenty of other people involved. As you'll see when they do this video of Eyes on the Prize, there were a number of people that were interviewed. But I think when it came to the racial issues, I was one of the few white people, certainly, who was involved in that effort. And to be perfectly honest, I took advantage of my white privilege to be able to make things happen that other people couldn't make happen because they weren't white. And I think it was a good partnership that we should see more of in combating racism in the society.
That is so true. And, you hit the nail on the head when, talking about how can people use their privileges to bring about change. And, recently I commented on Michael Moore, who said he's going to give up he's threatened to give, maybe he said it jokingly, he's going to give up his citizenship because of the overturning of Roe. And I responded to Mr. Moore, actually. I responded to him and I said, well, you know what? I don't think you should give it up. You should use the power to help to create change, Right.
Absolutely. It can get exhausting though, continuing to fight the same battles over and over again. Still to this day. Today, something like 70%. There's a lot fewer people who have AIDS today than there was back at the beginning. But 70% of those who have AIDS today are young Black gay men. And there's only
that's
one.
Still high.
It's very high. There's really only one organization in the city. It's called the Colors Organization. That is purposely
the Colors.
Colors, it's called Colors Organization.
Okay.
It goes back to it was started in the 90s. But they're the only people who are really doing AIDS education in the Black gay community. There's because AIDS is no longer as big a deal as it was in the 80s and 90s. It's harder to get attention for AIDS. And a lot of these younger Black gay men, especially the ones who are homeless or who are addicted or who are just very poor, are making it through the day by hustling, by selling their bodies. And that puts them at very high risk of HIV disease. And there's a lot of denial about that today. I mean,
and then we have social media. We have social media now, which is creating even more opportunities for them to sell their bodies and to be
absolutely.
Okay. No, and you said something that was very important earlier, which I just want to touch on. You said something, well, we can touch on it, but you talk about the proportion of people with HIV/AIDS, or in the 80s, you in terms of demographically, in terms of white people, you said that their numbers was going down. Black and Latinos, their numbers went high. And you talk about the issue of money. Black people have so much to deal with. But the point I'm trying to make, look at income. We talk about, I wrote a book about income inequality and poverty, and I talk about income. The issue of income is even borne out with the issue of HIV/AIDS. We talk about COVID and how COVID showed the disparities in society, HIV/AIDS, and issues of health is always showing how the issue of racism creates that kind of disparity and how it's effective.
Absolutely. I mean, it's built in. It's really built into a for-profit healthcare system.
Yes.
It's like if you're reliant on government benefits, you're not a good client for a hospital or for a medical practice. You're not going to be able to pay as much as somebody who has better insurance than that, or can pay for themselves. And so we have a healthcare system that's developed that is, again, just like it was in the 80s around AIDS, fundamentally against poor people. It's not so much racist as it is against poor people. The problem is most of the people of color are poor people. And so they have this double whammy that hits them. And it's hard to make in the white gay community back in the 80s, the reason why they had a hard time getting medical care and getting money to be spent by the government on AIDS was because of homophobia. People were prejudiced against gay people. Once the epidemic started spreading in communities of color, it was the old-fashioned racist attitudes of government came into play. And it wasn't, and in those communities of color, there were a whole slew of problems. It wasn't just AIDS. The white gay community was well off generally. The people who were open about their homosexuality, they were people who could afford to do that. In the Black gay community, it was regular, ordinary people who were getting AIDS, and the problems they had included AIDS, but were not limited to AIDS.
Right. Yes.
And that's a big difference between what was happening to white gay men who had white privilege on their side, and Black gay men didn't have white privilege on their side. They had to worry about housing. They had to worry about education. They had to worry about all the things poor people have to worry about because they don't have enough resources. And that wasn't the problem in the white gay community. So it was no coincidence that the white gay community treated those of us who were drawing attention to AIDS among poor people and among people of color as we were being leftist radicals because we kept talking about poverty and we kept talking about race. And they didn't know how to deal with it. They were talking about white privilege. There was no community more white privileged than the white gay community in the 70s and 80s.
Yes. Wow, that's quite interesting, and I'm learning. I said there is the issue of racism was within the church. Yeah. So of course, and that's the place that's supposed to be pure, and then of course, so it's quite. So it's not far fetched to kind of to hear stories of this. I mean, I could see that happening it's happening in the church. I guess it can happen anywhere.
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned the church. I mean,
yes,
when I was running the AIDS office for the city, we hired a guy who was very active in one of the major churches whose son had died from AIDS, and we hired him to help us talk to ministers to try to get them to talk about AIDS in their congregations. And we even got to the point where we offered to pay ministers if they would let him come and talk to their congregations on a Sunday morning, which worked. They were willing to do it if they were getting paid. And and what we found was there were basically two types of ministers: those who believed it was up to them to decide who was a good Christian, and those who believed it was up to Jesus to decide who was a good Christian. And those who believed it was up to Jesus were willing to give the benefit of the doubt that maybe these gay people were okay. It wasn't up to them to judge. And we've touched that nerve in the Black church community in the late 80s and early 90s as well. And I used to be invited sometimes myself to talk to Black congregations about what was going on with AIDS. And I would tell them at the beginning of my talk every time that they shouldn't be hearing this message from me because there were people in the congregation this morning who have HIV, and they need to speak up. They have to have the courage to speak up. Because you can deny what I'm saying, but what I'm telling you is my community of white gay men is dying right and left, and your community is dying right and left too, but you just don't know and you just don't care. And people were willing to hear it from me. I was surprised. They were willing to let me as a white gay man lecture them in a Black church. I thought that was very interesting.
Wow, it was, yes. And this is quite here we are in the 80s, 70s, 80s. You're working as I guess you were very young at the time. So they invited you to come in, and what were people saying at the time when they saw this young man coming in? How old were you at the time when you started this work?
I was about 35.
Okay.
At the time.
Yes.
I think it was so weird that in some ways I was more acceptable.
Yes.
I mean, it helped that I was a friend of Wilson Goods, and he was the mayor of Philadelphia. And the Black community was very proud that it had its first Black mayor, and he had endorsed me. So that made me more acceptable. I was also very active and visible in the Black community because of my work with the Hospital Workers Union, which was a very large, predominantly Black union. So I had things going for me, I have to admit. But I think they also related to the passion I brought to it. I wasn't trashing them for being homophobic. I just said, I was saying to them, whether you like it or not, your sons mostly are going to die from this disease because you're not willing to help them stay alive. And it's like, should they die because they're gay? And people would argue with me about those kinds of things and throw the Bible at me and all sorts of other stuff. But at the time, especially, I was much more arrogant than I am today. And so I think the fact that I put myself through it, that they respected the fact that I was willing to put myself as the only white man in the church and the only white gay man, certainly in the church, that I was willing to put myself in the midst of it. I think they were both thought that was very weird and didn't understand it, and were willing to respect that it took some courage to do that.
Oh wow, this is and you said earlier that you got $9 million from the mayor at the time, and it's quite interesting that it wasn't until Philadelphia got a Black mayor that they really got the funding and started doing some work in terms of tackling HIV/AIDS in the African American community. It's quite interesting. But where did they get the money? Did they get it from the feds or did they get it from the city?
No, I've never known where he actually got the money from. Okay. The city literally was going bankrupt at the time. So I think his feeling was, we're already spending money we don't have. We might as well spend some money we don't have on something
Yes.
important. I
Yes.
honestly
Yes.
think that was his attitude.
Yes.
And fortunately, right around that time, it was 1990. I got that job in 1987 and kept it until 1990. In 1990, finally, when George H.W. Bush was president, they passed a law in Congress called the Ryan White Act, where they started spending federal money on AIDS. So it got a lot easier after that law was passed.
Was that after Reagan? Was that after Reagan?
That was after Reagan. After Reagan, yes. Yeah, it would never have happened when Reagan was governor.
Yes.
He just didn't care. He didn't even mention until the end of his administration. He never even mentioned the word AIDS.
Yes. Yes.
He was too busy putting black people in jail.
Yeah. Yes, he was. And some time ago, I was reading a posting you did on LinkedIn, and you talked about housing in Philadelphia, and many young people are getting older now, and then they're becoming young adults, but housing is a sore issue, and poverty is a sore issue. That you see the rise in poverty and so on, and young people are prostituting themselves. We touched on this a little bit more as a way for them, the only way out is through having and doing it and unsafe practices.
Exactly. I mean, I'm co-chair of an organization called Philly Homes for Youth, which is advocating on behalf of homeless young people in Philadelphia. There's our belief is that there are about 1,000 young people, meaning people under the age of 24 and under, who are homeless, literally homeless. They may not be on the street every night because they might be living couch to couch with friends that they have or whatever.
Yes.
But the city is in total denial about homeless youth and spends a little bit of money. There are a couple of home shelters specifically for young people, but nothing like the need that we have. And our organization, Philly Home for Youth Coalition, asked the city, which got $42 million of COVID money, one-time COVID money from the city, from the federal government.
Yeah.
We asked them to spend 20% of that money on homeless youth because we believe 20% of the homeless population is young people. Yeah. And they said no. They're not willing to do that.
Wow.
And it's mostly because these are young, predominantly people of color again. A lot of LGBT people, a lot of LGBT youth are homeless because they're thrown out of their homes because they're LGBT. The city government sees nobody caring about these kids except for the few of us who are advocating for it. And so they think they can deny it and not do anything about it. And we're still fighting that battle. That's going to be a long battle, but we're going to eventually get through to them. And there's a new election for mayor next year. And we're already plotting and planning on how we're going to make homeless youth one of the major issues of that campaign.
Making homeless, and I'm going to ensure I highlight this. So there's an election in Philadelphia, mayoral election in Philadelphia next year, and we want to make make shelters or homelessness an issue amongst the youth population. Okay, and I'm going to make, and we talk about, I know we are talking about eyes on the prize, but we talk about homelessness, and I said, and we talk about gun violence in Philadelphia, also the rise in carjackings, and it's just a lot that's going on in Philadelphia. That people are fearful. I live in Germantown. I talk to people every day on the streets. People are fearful. That's all you hear every single day. How are you? Oh my God! Do you see what's going on in Philadelphia? It's be safe. And that's what you hear. And then a lot of the younger people are committing the crimes. A lot of the younger, and I'm saying, and many of them don't have the issue of homelessness. Has to include not just the shelter over their heads. It has to include the issue of having parents or some kind of guidance within the home, because it will help to guide. You know, I have a situation where I've seen some young people. I mentor a lot of young people as well, and they many of them live in households they don't belong to. There's nobody to guide them. They leave when they want. They do whatever they need to, and they struggle to get by. And I'm saying to you, if they had a proper shelter, a proper home, they'll not only are they going to have shelter, but they'll also have parenting or guidance or
yes,
help. And that's,
I mean, there's a whole infrastructure
yeah,
in a healthy community that does not exist in many neighborhoods in Philly. I live in Germantown as well. We've had two murders on our block in the last 3 months.
Yes.
And if you think, and I live in the neighborhood we're in is predominantly an African American community, and you know, I'm a 70-year-old white man, and I have to admit, when I get into the car every morning, I feel I made it. I made it to the car. You know,
yes.
It's a real crisis, and I think, again, I don't think American society is built to care about young people of color or young poor people. It's like you're in the suburbs, you know, in the white suburbs, the young people have a good education, they have more resources, they're able to have a better chance of succeeding. But then especially in the big poor cities, many of those young people, white and black, who are poor, don't have any opportunity to succeed. And so as a result, they take advantage, they do what they need to do to survive, because there's no way out. They see no way out. And that's and a good poor, and a lot of the homeless youth that we deal with, we have about 60 homeless youth who are members of our coalition. And what they go through every day is like astounding to me, that they even can smile, because there's so many pressures on them and so little opportunity and so little goes their way. And I can understand why those young people get desperate and depressed and feeling hopeless, where things like being disrespected is a reason to kill somebody, because it's just so much, it's just because of the world that they're living in.
Yes, that is so true. And I'm grateful and happy for the work that you are doing in Philadelphia, and by extension, the US, and by extension, the world. And you know, I have some more questions. I have another question as it relates to let's get back to Eyes on the Prize. And I wanted to ask you a question. I said, now, you were interviewed by HBO, but is it an HBO or PBS production, Eyes on the Prize?
It's an HBO production. It's not a PBS production.
It's not PBS?
No, PBS did the original series, but this one's an HBO series.
Okay. And
but there's nothing, I couldn't find anything about the HBO series on the web. So when I put my posting on LinkedIn, the only link I could make was to the PBS series.
Yes,
so
and
that's probably why I confused you a little bit about that.
Yeah, I saw PBS. I'm like, so I wasn't sure, and then I did some reading before. I was doing some research. Watched the film Eyes on the Prize again about the civil rights movement. By the way, I said I was going to ask you a very important question. I said, you were talking about what's going on in the African American community, and when I watched the beginning of, and to be honest, I went to HBO Max. I saw it on HBO Max, and I wasn't sure if it was PBS. It never really said PBS, so this is part of the new series. But I think it was from the old series. It was in black and white.
Yes, the old series is the only series that's out there, and it was originally broadcast on PBS.
Oh, okay.
Back in the 80s, when they first came out, it was on PBS. Now you can get Eyes on the Prize on the regular, video platforms.
Okay. Now, I watched the opening of the first episode, first series. Listen to this. The woman said, "We wanted something for ourselves, and our children. So we took a chance on our lives. That's the opening line to Eyes on the Prize. And I said to myself, why did they put that scene as the opening scene? And I think I know why. Because in a sense, it has the feeling as if this is the theme, the message, how Blacks work to secure rights. In a sense, they wanted something for themselves and their children. So they were willing to take a chance on their lives. Right. But in a sense, you said that in the 60s or going into the 70s after we got civil rights, it's as if it lost traction and steam. And I am looking at this statement where this woman said, we wanted something for ourselves, this African-American woman, we wanted something for ourselves. And we took our chance, in our life. In a sense, Black African-Americans or Black people have always been taking chances on their lives. All they know is how to take chances on their lives in order to get ahead or in order to get something. And people are willing to prostitute themselves and to expose, and people will tell you, I'm doing it for the money, and there's no thinking about safety or anything of the sort. And so, younger people, I'm wondering if that kind of attitude come from that cycle, that culture of gambling, willing to gamble, to gamble, take a chance on your life in order to make life work for you, in order to live,
Well, when you don't think you have a lot to lose, then you're more likely to take a chance. I mean, I think the reality is, in my lifetime, there was a time in my youth where somebody like you could not have succeeded in the way that you've succeeded. It just wouldn't have been permitted.
Right.
Or if it was permitted, you would be the unicorn. You would be the one person standing out.
Right.
There is a Black middle class now. There's even a Black upper middle class now. The Black presence in the media is much greater than it used to be in Hollywood and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of progress that has been made. That can't be doubted. But there's a lot of people being left behind as well.
Yeah.
And now the problem that younger Black people and poor Black people face is not only the racism of the white community, but the inability or the unwillingness of Black people who have made it to take their side. It's like the whole pull yourself up by your bootstrap stuff. Everybody's supposed to have equal opportunity. And we're in denial about the fact that people don't, in fact, have equal opportunity. And that if everybody did have equal opportunity, you could justify it a little bit more why we don't do something about poverty. It's like if it's your own fault for being poor, then that's one thing. But most poor people have no way out. And I think the larger middle class community, both Black and white, is unwilling to accept that that's true. But I believe it's true. I work in the child welfare system now. And the child welfare system is another racist system. Something, in Philadelphia, about the Black population of Philadelphia is about 45, 50%. The number of kids in the child welfare system who are Black is closer to 80%.
Yeah.
And their crime is being poor. That's the reason why the child welfare system takes them from those families, because they can't care for their kids. And it's not their fault they can't care for their kids. There's just not enough money. There's not enough jobs. There's not enough resources. There's not even enough government programs. And so I think there's a whole underclass. If you want to talk about Karl Marx and all that kind of stuff, he predicted there was going to be this underclass that society just threw away. And I think that part has come true.
Wow. This is, I hopefully I get a chance to talk. You're in Germantown. Hopefully I get a chance, because I also want to talk to you about child welfare in Philadelphia, but that's for another topic, because child welfare is dear to my heart. I spent most of my time I was a case manager. I worked at Bethana, a core case manager. And I worked at Bethana.
Yeah, really?
I worked at Bethana. I worked at
Karen Hamilton.
I worked as a IHIPS case manager in home protective services. I used to go, and the thing is, I was studying anthropology as well. So I love this job because you go into people's homes and their lives. You get to find out what is going on. And I also was an FGDM, family group decision making, and a YTC facilitator and coordinator. So, I've worked at almost various levels. Yes. So that's why I said I follow you. I'm very familiar, and I would love, because I am concerned about child welfare. I have ideas that I would love to put to you. I spoke with a young man today, and I said, he's about 24. And I said to him, I asked him this, I was at the tennis court, and I said, in Germantown by Albury, if you know where that is. I said, let me ask you a question, and you might know where that is, right?
Yeah.
I said to him, what is wrong with Philadelphia? And he said to me, a lot. The violence and the killings is just too, and he's 24. And then I said to him, okay, what is causing it? And he said, people are growing up angry. And a lot of people and he alluded to the foster care program and how people in these programs, they have these programs, but they are angry and they are taking out their anger on others. So I was very interested in the answer. So I said to him, why did you answer like that? Are you affected, or are you related or connected in any way to the foster care system why you could speak so powerfully? He said, yes. I can speak powerfully because my brother is from that particular, and he is angry all the time, and I love him a lot, but he's creating problems for people in our community. So I said, okay, but what can you do to solve the problem? And he stopped. He said, wow, I've never really thought beyond that point. And so I said, probably that's some of the discussions that we need to have. Okay, fine, let us have this, and then I started talking to him. He said, wow, because here's a young man who is concerned as well, but he doesn't know how to. And I used to do mentorship as well, and I was a guru on mentorship. I said to him, you may not be able to do big things, but in your own little community, you could encourage some of these young people. Some of them, talk with them, encourage them, invest in their lives. You don't have to give them money in a way, but let them know you're there, provide guidance, talk with them, and so on and so forth. Sometimes some of these young men, they need that. And he said, wow, that's true. I've never thought about that. And I said, I said to him, I continued the conversation. He said, because we can also empower people in communities. And FGDM was about empowering the families, empowering people to be able to. But of course, it needed more strengthening. Okay, but it could start. But what do you have to any comments as it relates to foster care or child youth and family services, and how we can speak, how that speaks to the whole issue of what's going on with the epidemic or in Philadelphia?
Well, that's another whole
yes. You know what?
conversation.
We won't be able to touch that right now. I'll get to that another time. So we can talk, and I would love to sit down and talk with you over coffee, at Germantown Espresso Bar or wherever you are. But this is a great conversation for us to have. But as we only have an hour, and I think I only have 5 minutes.
Okay.
Or 3 minutes, actually. So I wanted to ask a question. And the question is, Black scholars are revisiting how we view the slave or the Black man or the history of Black people in terms of moving away from a victim to a hero approach. And I'm saying, as we look at this film that you were just a part of, do you see the history of Black people as it relates to the fighting to bring about change as it relates to the AIDS epidemic? Do you see? Can you see any kind of moving away from victim? Can you see the hero of the Black man in this?
Oh, I think today there's much less. I mean, again, it depends on your socioeconomic status and how much agency you think you have in your life. But I see a lot more people, from my perspective as a white man, working in a predominantly Black organization even today.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more of a sense of power.
Right.
I mean, there's a perception that that Black people don't have the same power I have. There's no such thing as Black privilege. But But to be able to have a little bit more control over your life, to be able to be willing to speak out for yourself. I mean, again, when I was growing up, Black people were silent. Typically. Because it was too scary to speak out. Now people are speaking out all the time, and that's a really good thing. I mean, the whole reaction to the George Floyd murder was something that would never have happened in my youth. So I think there is progress definitely being made.
Right. Yes.
But I think the thing we have to remember is that still people are being left behind, and they're not being left behind just by white people. They're being left behind by Black people as well. So people who are sick. It's getting less and less. It's still a fundamentally racism dynamic. But the bottom line is, it's not just racism. It's also about privilege, and it's also about having enough money to take care of yourself and wanting to protect that, and not identify any longer with that 24-year-old young Black kid you were talking to. It's like that's a different world, and I don't want to be part of it. I mean, I think that's happening among white people and Black people. That's just not a white thing.
Yes. That is true. And I've always said that we have to abandon race because race is a pseudoscience. I've always said that. But because we are all one, because I believe in the unity, but of course we know that there is the issue of racial history in the past. But the final question, I was good, in my book, Neoliberalism, part 2 of section 2, entitled Resistance, chapter 11 to 12 looks at cinema and globalization in terms of analyzing how effective a tool cinematic film is in creating change. And I referenced Dirty Pretty Things and Life and Death, looking at how those films capture and tell and highlight the issues and stories of those people who are silent and the injustices that are being done. So my question is, and I said in the book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, my book there, I said, man has searched for truth. And according to Quandis Collison, film, art, and media have reflected this eternal search for truth. And Professor Clifford asserted that documentary is one of the major achievements of cinema and film because of how film, because according to Vertov, because of how films seek for truth or that kind of realism, and they use revolutionary style and so on. So my question is, do you think Eyes on the Prize and film like these, and even the film that you're going to be part of, of the next series, is it believable? Does it search for truth? Does it provide truth? Does it speak and in terms of and the sources? What are the sources? And of course, I already know the source because first of all, I thought you were a producer first, but now you are a source and you lived it, you experienced it, and you spearheaded. But I'm still posing the question to you: does it search for truth in a sense? Is it believable? And the sources. Now, what are its sources?
Well, in terms of film and that stuff, I think especially for the younger generation, video is how they communicate with each other, and I think that can be very empowering. It can also be disempowering. People get hurt sometimes on TikTok and things like that. But the reality is, I think that the generations of African American people beyond that followed the generation that I grew up in were able to imagine success and self-efficacy and agency in a way that previous African American populations were not able to, and that's because they could see it in the media. They see a lot of unrealistic stuff in the media as well, and so you have a lot of these young people thinking they're going to be rich rap stars or something. It can go too far, but the general, it's a whole different world today. That on TV alone, there tends to be interracial media most of the
Yes.
time. In
Right.
commercials, in TV shows, there's always the token black person, but
Yes.
at least they're there, and they
Yes.
generally are successful, or they're as successful, at least, as the white people who are in the show.
Yes.
Those kinds of images, I think, are critically important to give people a sense of hope that it really can happen.
Right.
I think I grew up as an activist because in the 60s on television, there were activists. The news was covering all these activists, and I wanted to be one of them. And I believed it was possible to be one of them because I saw it on screen. And I think for young African-American people, especially young, poor African-American people, they can see a potential way out by seeing what they see in the media. Of course, the media is also full, and the video games and everything else are also full of violence and of teaching people other things about what the possibilities are. And we have to combat that in some way.
Wow, this is powerful. Thank you so much. And any final thoughts? And
my final thought is I thought you were crazy when you reached out to me on LinkedIn. This is just one of those crazy people who pops off all the time. I'm glad to know that you're not that.
Oh no, definitely not.
You're an actual intellectual. I kind of like that.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. And as I wrap up, when we finish with the interview, it should be available either tonight or tomorrow. And I'll also type everything that you say and publish it as an article. It should be available at theneoliberal.com, RonaldoCMcKenzie.com. It will be available in my LinkedIn commentary. And but this is quite powerful. I love it. And I'm going to send you my direct number when we're finished with it, so that we can communicate, definitely. And for those yes, and did I give you the final words?
No, you didn't.
And you have the final.
Are you giving me the final word?
Well, I'm going to probably close out by saying something, but okay, before I give you the final word, one more thing. Thank you for listening to this great interview and this amazing gentleman who has been very instrumental in helping to turn the tide in Philadelphia as it relates to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And and not just that, he's also instrumental in working in developing child, youth, and family services and how we think about care. So that is amazing. And so we are happy. And just so you know, this show, the Neoliberal Round podcast, celebrates 1 year this week. This is our 71st show. And on Thursday, yes, we are 1 year. And thank you guys so much for listening to us. We are we are top ranked in Canada and the US, and we're growing. And I started it last year, and it has not been easy, much challenges, but so far we have overcome some of the challenges, and we continue to provide the show free of cost. And for those of us who want to donate to the show, you can donate at https://anchor, anchor.fm/the-neoliberal/support. And we are available on Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and we just got onto Amazon Music, the Alexa app.
Sorry, I'm having trouble connecting to the internet. It looks like an issue with the router.
I am so sorry about that. That is my Alexa, which I did not tell you. But yes, interrupted my ending. To her. But yes, but we're on Amazon, we're on Alexa. Alexa just spoke with me, and but we're also available on Stitcher and Spotify. And Radio Public. If you are not in the US or Canada, you can listen to us anywhere in the world. And thank you so much, guys. Continue to support us, and we're looking forward. By the way, coming up next, we're going to be talking with John Anthony Castro, the US 2024 presidential candidate, who will be giving us an update as to the filing. He's going to be filing a federal election. He's going to be filing a suit against the Federal Election Commission, and Donald Trump saying he's ineligible. And we're about 15 days from the date. July 25th is the date, I believe. So we're coming close to that date. And that's about it. And on Thursday or Friday, I will be interviewing Steve Shagnon, who is one of the founding members of Tennis Philly. And I play tennis as well. But I'm going to be interviewing him about the program that's going on in Philadelphia as it relates to tennis. And I think I also want to ask him how we can develop tennis as a sport amongst African Americans, because I have Black and brown communities, because I have an idea about how we could do that. But thank you so much. And now the final word to our main man. Who let me tell you, this guy is amazing. I follow you, just so you know. I read your stuff, and you are passionate. You have a passion. You're using your privilege to really promote things that help the vulnerable, and that is powerful.
Well, thank you for that.